Pick up and deliver.
Well,
So,
we are now live. John, good morning as always to Wake Up and Deliver.
morning. Yeah. Waking up. Well, I guess it's not super early today, but still start of a Monday, new week.
Yeah. We're gonna start off like we always do with some morning coffee. Let me get my quote of the day. I thought this was another. Every week I find these interesting, but so much can be accomplished in one focused hour, especially when that hour is part of a routine, a sacred rhythm that becomes part of your daily life. By Danny Shapiro. I find myself that a focus time is key for me to be successful. If I'm not, if I don't have focus time, like I'm all over the place and I can't get nothing accomplished, I think it's crucial in anything that you do, whether it's logistics or any kind of work. You need that time to be really focused on the topics and the tasks at hand.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I mean, there's a big swing these days where studies talk about multitasking versus monotasking and how for a long time people were like, I can do 10 things at once, and that was like a badge of honor. And a lot of information these days coming out that being like, yeah, you can do 10 things an hour and you pretty much like suck at all of them. Like, you know what I mean? That because your
Yeah.
attention is so split and because you're working on so many different things, you're not actually getting any deep work on anything. So you see a lot more of a trend these days talking about people focusing on, do your one thing, move on, time block for each different thing is better than, you know, well, I'm doing my RFP and I'm also answering emails at the same time, and look at me because I'm getting a lot done in these X amount of hours.
I was going to say in logistics, it's so much more prevalent because you are prone to doing multiple things at the same time because there's multiple different actions that need to be done. And it's always like juggling, but you should really focus on specific tasks and break up your time and really do them well.
Yeah, definitely people are tempted to take on a lot, right? And that's often because, by design they're wearing multiple hats, or just because you know how it is. You're sitting at the desk or whatever, something comes across your desk. You could say, oh, well, that's like, you know, that's Dave's thing. I'm going to wait for Dave to answer. Or you kind of, if you know how it fits and whatever, sometimes it's like, look, Dave always says yes or always says no to this or always does this. It's easier to just take the action either with the assumption, kind of do a little bit of it yourself and just move on, right? So that you can do your next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week has been a little bit of a eventful week. We had a whole bunch of stuff. You were talking about Uber, Walmart. We had a few things that you posted on LinkedIn and some of the challenges we were having. Maybe take off with some of those ideas this morning, John.
Yeah, I thought I'll start with a funny one from last night because it was random, and like kind of don't usually just do random posts in the middle of the day. Try to make sure to think about what you want to write and whatever. But last night saw something super random about an Uber driver posting about the job they had to do to make $6. And the guy was so mad. He's like, I usually always reject $6 orders because he goes, there's always some nonsense versus the amount of money. He's like, it's never easy enough. And he goes, but this time I took it because it was super close and I figured, I'm almost done, whatever. And he posts all of these pictures of what it took to do the delivery. And it was just absolutely insane, like where he had to go, how far he had to walk. So I just kind of like shoot up there last night and I'm like, would anyone do this for $6? And then on the flip side, to a retailer or to an e-commerce brand, it's like, this is what's happening. And do you actually believe that your delivery experience is going to be anything but shaky at best when you're trying to fulfill your customer orders this way? Kind of blew up. It's actually still running this morning.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this many times. The value of the delivery is being so brought down to the lowest mark to make it as free as possible. It's eroding the quality of that service as well. There's no white glove to this. Now it's just a massive commodity is who can do it cheaper and better. But I think we've reached the bottom at it. For $6, there's very little I would do for $6.
Well, when
You know what I
you
mean? Like
yeah, but when you
not
think
to
about
put
it,
it
it's
that it's
not
not
it's not just
valuable.
$6 on a capacitized model, like where it's like $6
Exactly.
per order. It's like no, that was $6. That's like essentially a pure dedicated hotshot. I run to the restaurant, I wait for your order, I run it over to your place. I do all the running around, and I get all the way back to my car, and then I try and do my next thing. Like you're not talking about a guy that's going house to house to house, dropping off boxes for $6 each.
Yeah, it's a whole segment of a move. And how long would that whole $6 take? It would take what, 15-20 minutes if it's very close to one another, if that.
Oh, honestly, DoorDash themselves last year, like in one of their papers, posted that their average delivery from order to fulfillment, which you figure is like 90% taken up by the driver when you're ordering from like a QSR, like whatever, is 33 minutes. So this guy is probably spending 25 minutes plus doing this order for $6, which means you still come down to having like two deliveries per hour, which I'm sorry, but like just not gonna cut it. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a good segue too, because you were just talking about this as the political landscape and regulations that are changing in across the board, specifically in the U.S. And you're talking about when we were chatting about this new running mate for Harris. Not to get all political, but it's good to talk about the regulation changes.
Yeah.
Minnesota, you alluded to it. I didn't know this. Maybe discuss what Minnesota has done and how that could be far more effective, not effective, far more challenging than the menace what's going across for air freight.
Yeah. So one small little thing, right? And you're right. I don't like to get super political, but a lot of these benefits or sort of opportunities that the companies are taking are, because they're either legal, allowed, or whatever. And obviously, whoever's in power has that, has that ability to change it. So one kind of thing that's come out now is that Tim Walz, right, which is the VP that Kamala Harris has chosen for her running mate, he's the governor of Minnesota. As of July 1st, Minnesota has now a retail delivery fee, right? So it applies to purchases of $100 or more and then are getting delivered in the state. So $100 is obviously way too high. I kind of question the way that like it's put in there, but if I'm being brutally honest, if I'm a politician and I know that I eventually want to get to tax all of the deliveries to help my infrastructure and to help my cities and to help my construction, I'm not going to right away go with the $5 orders and tax everything and get everybody frustrated. I'm going to pick something that is impacting people that, probably another little X amount of percentage isn't going to be the most disruptive thing. Because if you think about it these days, if you're making an order that starts going over $100 from one retailer for one delivery, you're making a bigger order. You know what I mean? So you're not just buying like a pen. But it's a great way to start. I know that sounds terrible to say, but it's a great way to start. But it's picking up, and if I wanted to be able to do it longer term and with a broader base, I would start there. But you can see that it's not something new from him per se, or in the state of Minnesota. Colorado has had one that went into effect since 2022, and they actually just raised the rates in 2024. Washington State is considering a 30-cent retail delivery fee. So is Nevada, Ohio, and I think everyone has heard about New York and their congestion fee that was right on the cusp of going into effect and then kind of got pulled back or delayed at the last moment.
So how will that affect some of these e-commerce last mile delivery guys? Is it going to benefit those ones, or is it hurting more of the retailers? Because I'm a little bit confused on it. So if you can explain it to me too, I'd be
Um,
interested.
well, I mean, essentially now it becomes a fee that somebody has to pay. So the likelihood is that it's the retailer. But I think the interesting thing is going to be like, how do you manage it and stuff. So the way I think that they're seeing it work in Minnesota is that they've given the retailers like multiple ways to pay for it. But I could also realistically see that if I'm a if I'm a retailer, do I really want to manage now getting all of my shipments, confirming the days they went in? Like, what if a truck didn't go? What if there are delays? When do I pay it? How do I pay what? Blah, 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 whatever. I wouldn't be surprised to see retailers start asking carriers to pay it on their behalf, like even if they have to be charged or whatever. But then it becomes this whole messy thing of like, does it become baked into contracts? Does it become baked in at certain rates? Like what happens now if they're like, hey, we want a little protection from some of these fees because, you're dealing with lots of customers maybe and things like that. So it sounds like it should be really cut and dry, but I mean, either way, the costs for consumers go up in some way. And then now you've got this whole program that's tied to the logistics of the delivery that's essentially going to require some type of management and oversight and auditing, right? I'm sure you can appreciate auditing of accessorial charges on freight bills. That's going to have to start to go in there. And then, how do you really start to manage that with millions or billions of packages a year if it broadly went across the US? I think the most likely thing is that it would be a tax. It somehow would just increase costs for the carriers because I can't see that many packages. Like there's going to have to be some way that's going to no one's going to want to deal with that many transactional sort of recordings and submissions.
I mean, I don't know. From my perspective, any more burden on the carrier right now is going to force a lot of different challenges and cost cutting that's already affecting in this crazy market. Like I know, like we were just talking about this morning. I got John raising his hand.
Robert,
I mean Robert, sorry.
I've already raised
Uh,
my hand.
you got carriers that are already bucking at the current economy, not having enough, and they're cutting corners on preventive maintenance and other things, and it's showing because their service is starting to go down because of this pressure. Like you don't want to continue down a path of putting the burden on the final guy because you're gonna have service issues, but then it will reflect your brand as well. And you
Mm-hmm.
can imagine having a dilapidated old truck coming to deliver and the tire blows in front of your driveway and it's like you don't want any of that. Like you want proper people to have uh, proper service abilities and their equipment is well maintained. And when you run that price down and put more burden on those carriers, it's going to become harder and harder. Usually, safety is the one of the first things that most carriers start looking at, going, "Can we cut corners here?" When they shouldn't at all.
They do. I'll jump into that after, but I'll let Robert say good morning. And Robert, what piqued your interest this morning?
Well, I just wanted to say good morning and give you an update. Friday, 3 days ago, I received my fully executed contract, and so that means I can start spending money that will be reimbursed finally by grant funding of 75,000. This is the first outside funding of any real significance that I've had developing the delivery utility system.
Well, that's awesome.
So
Congrats. Gives you
yeah,
some runway.
Congratulations.
oh yeah, it extends the runway a good half a year, maybe 12 months total. The scope of the proposal I gave is to basically go from where I'm at to having not necessarily a minimum viable product, but certainly what I would call, if I could coin a phrase, demonstration grade. So it's a portable demonstrator. The track sections are like 8 foot length, and it goes together kind of like a garden railroad. Actually, up on stands there, and
Oh, very, very cool. You have to make sure to keep everyone updated. And I hope you're able to sort of document and share, especially on LinkedIn or anywhere else if it is, so that, people can see sort of what's going on.
at certain significant milestones, I'll be sure and put some things up. Then I'll be proceeding finally on patent prosecution. I'll get a hold of my law firm today. I'll reach out to them. I'll probably will hear back tomorrow at the latest. And of course, now I can commission some of the supplies instead of hand making all of this stainless steel rail that's folded by hand. It took hundreds of hours. Um, I'll commission it from a roll press where it'll be formed in probably 100 foot a minute instead of, you know, 2 hours per foot. It's just going to be so much easier.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a challenging thing for a lot of people, right? Like, innovation is great and stuff like that, but you can also see that the costs of innovation are super high. That's why a lot of these companies that eventually end up with what seems like a relatively high GM product or something like that is because they've usually spent tons of money ahead of time in R&D finally getting there and coming to a completed solution, right? Not necessarily all of the challenges once everything's been worked out.
I'll joke about it. I think how I'll joke about it down the road, if I'm successful and later talk about it, and somebody will say, "Wow, Rob," they'll say, "you really became an overnight success. What did it take?" And I'll say, "Well, 15 years of sticking with it, nights and weekends. That's
Yeah,
what it takes."
exactly. No such thing as an overnight success. Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing the update, and as always for jumping in and being willing to open up on the mic. I think everyone always appreciates that. Um, Matt, I wanted just quickly, because right before Robert jumped in, we talked about safety. I think that's super important, obviously, and it for anyone listening or when they're watching the replay or whatever. I think, it's not that anyone, I would say broadly speaking, at least from my experience, actively chooses to be unsafe. I think what it becomes is kind of like these decisions of like cognitive dissonance, where it's like, well, I'll just, wait till next week, one more job, one more thing here. I can put this off. It's not so bad this way. And they keep missing these little opportunities to take advantage of a problem when it's smaller versus when it's larger. And then when it gets into the safety realm, that's when you see, major breakdowns or you see major failures, which can often become very unsafe depending on where they happen.
Well, it's that engine light thing. How many people ride around with an engine light when they could have solved the problem a lot earlier, right? And it's that whole thing. It's like, I'll do it later. It's not a big deal. This engine light, it's just a faulty light or a faulty wire. But eventually, it becomes something. And it's the same thing with a lot of these preventive maintenance tasks. That's why you have bigger companies, like we've talked about, that are very, very specific on making sure their preventive maintenance is top notch. And that's why bigger retailers will hire a big company, because they know of their, breakdown situation. They know that they can rescue, they can do a whole bunch of different things. While smaller carriers, smaller ones, like we're talking about final mile or even regular delivery, they have less of an ability to be able to quickly pivot or have a good preventive maintenance program to help ease that challenge away from occurring and affecting product, right? And I think my hedge is we're going to see a lot more companies having challenges in the next little bit, because I've heard a whole bunch of my trucker friends. They're saying, "Hey, I got to get some new equipment because I'm breaking down a lot. Because it's hard to get parts, it's hard to get things fixed right now, and if I don't get new equipment, I just won't be able to run. I'll have to sit a truck, and my driver won't stick around if I have to sit that truck because he wants to get paid, right?" And I think that's going to be a common issue now, going as everybody was kind of tightening their belt for the last 6 to 1 year. It's going to start showing, and these are going to be more common problems that you're going to hearing from customers, that they're saying, "Hey, why are we having so many breakdowns now?"
Yeah, it's funny too though, because usually people try to mask or hide that. When I was in my last spot, that was the first time I've ever seen a company openly admit that they had a breakdown or had a problem with the vehicle. That being said, they benefited from very customized vehicles, so it became like an easy to understand kind of challenge, because I think the general and broad expectation across the market is that if you have a breakdown, it's like, well, get another truck, get another driver, right? Because you can do rentals, you can do whatever, you can, get it from a sister facility, a partner, blah, 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 whatever, or, find a different way to get it done. Um, but I agree, running, because when I was there, part of what sort of myself and the team did was like the fleet programs, the fleet management, trying to do all of the preventive maintenance. It's very challenging to do that at a larger scale, because the mechanics or the garages, right? You're going in, you're fitting in, other people have emergencies, other people don't have problems. It's like they bring it in, you can afford to have it in there for a day, but maybe not two. You bring it in for problem A and it's got B and C to go with it that was unexpected. And usually these are time constraints more than anything else, not so much like just dollars. Sometimes for a smaller carrier, it can be raw dollars too, where they're like, wow, I didn't expect a $15,000 repair over a $5,000 repair. So, those things can be legitimate. But I agree with you. I think that, more so that as people keep pushing service expectations and keep pushing lower price, people will then try to take one more job, work one more day, do one more weekend or whatever, and continually stretch things out, miss appointments, not get them on time, and then have more breakdowns. And especially if you're not really on it's easy to fall behind, easier than people think. And then sometimes it's even out of their control, right? In the sense of they finally were ready and then the garage couldn't take them, for example.
Yeah, well, and we're speaking obviously in trucking and trucker style problems, but you think about this is occurring not just even in the smaller ones. You have Boeing and you have major ship lines that they have these issues, and when they happen, it can be catastrophic, right? And you don't want those to occur. And it doesn't just happen to the little guy. In some cases, it happens to the big guys, and it's just like front page news, and it's happening more and more often. You got the Boeing spacecraft that's stuck at the International Space Station because they had a leak, and the people that went up there were supposed to be there for 6 days, and they might be there for a year because there's no way of bringing them back. These are some of the things that like we don't think about all the time in logistics because we're always focused on trucks and whatnot. But major delays in the other modes can be far more catastrophic when they have a maintenance breakdown.
Oh, for sure. So now you take all of that, right? So you have all of these, bigger truck, sort of commercial trucks, commercial industry, professional industry. What happens as you push more and more activity into, gig work, into smaller vehicles, into pushing the limits of what are quasi commercial vehicles? You know what I mean? Like they don't really have the same lifespan or expected use as like a real commercial vehicle.
Hybrid.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, and you just see them, you just see these things trying to break down because getting into a commercial garage is one thing, but who realistically, I shouldn't say who, I mean, there's obviously, but I would think that if you ask anybody, hey, do you have a great mechanic? Do you know a great mechanic? Or when your car breaks down, what do you do? Most people are like, whatever. Like, I've got this actually kind of cool mechanic close to the house. I called them for something. I was like, hey, I need to get you in. They're like, oh yeah, we're booking into late September. It's like late September. Like, guys, like what do you, and they do everything. Like, so it's like, what are you so jammed up with? And then what are you booking in that's that far out? So you can imagine people doing all of this gig work in their own vehicles and all of these platforms that are benefiting from people doing it. To me, that's like a ticking time bomb of problems waiting to come up.
And that goes across the difference between like we talked about the gig worker and the professionalist is they're driving that price down, so people are gonna buy different vehicles. And I miss the days when we had the last mile delivery and a nice, beautiful truck would come by and was handled properly in a car. Now I'm seeing minivans from the '90s come in and they're barely out the door with 1 foot and they're chucking it across the front because they're trying to get that pricing down as quickly as possible. And it changes the way the dynamic is. You're like we talked about cutting those corners, and part of it is how do I get the vehicle maintenance and all these things to emulate that? It's not sustainable, and
Well,
eventually
even,
we're going to have to change those model.
yeah, and even if you think about it, how many deliveries do you see made with a generic white van, usually some type of like, cargo van, that's just white and branded from whoever rental company. And these rental companies, if you think about it, like their concept of maintenance is borderline at best because for them, they don't like to keep the vehicles like more than like 18 months. So they're trying to constantly like offload it or just get rid of these things. Like, you know what I mean? So how much real care is going into maintenance, despite the fact that these things are rented for, months at a time from people doing Amazon or some next thing, just running around doing these deliveries.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the interesting dynamic that changes within that final mile. Is the gig worker going to be just a hybrid model, or we're going to still have some obviously good quality carries in there and to supplement, or is it going to become very much more gig worker oriented and there's no real validation of checking of preventive maintenance? Because when you hire a company, you need in that contract some kind of ability to make sure you maintain your equipment. As a gig worker, I don't think that's as important anymore when you sign that contract. It's not in there as, hey, maintain your equipment. It's just getting this job done, and can you do it?
Yeah, I agree. Very, very suspect. Why don't we jump topics maybe a little bit because I see Bill there and he might like this. So I saw that the other day that Walmart launched a type of cross-border service if you're selling through their marketplace. Basically, if you're buying full container loads, 20s or 40s, or 45s, I guess technically, but like, the high cap, but like if you're using any of these, you can now use the Walmart cross-border service, which basically they'll sell you their negotiated rates because they're acting as a, what is it, NVOOC or something like that, non-vessel owning operator, and sell this capacity and bring in this capacity. And what it is that they bring it into the US. And if it's standard delivery items, they automatically distribute it throughout their warehouse network so that, your product for being FBM or FWM, whatever, is in all over the country in the continental US, and you get the best opportunity to reach customers in a cost-effective way. If it's big and bulky stuff, like, you're selling furniture with them on their marketplace, for example, is probably the easiest one for people to think about. It probably stays at a primary facility where it lands, and then it'll ship direct to customers from there. But my point with that is that all of these larger players are all building out their flywheel. And there was someone else I wrote about too, just to highlight the point, but they're all building out more services. They're looking to get more revenue streams. And as they start to roll these things together, one, it makes it harder to compete for someone else because now it's like, hey, why, if I'm going to sell through Walmart Marketplace or Amazon or whatever, like, why am I not just using their quote unquote end-to-end style service? Yeah, maybe I pay a touch more, but it's like no headaches and I get the big logo trust, so to speak. But it also shows how now they're going to have these revenue streams from multiple, let's call it like activities or business units, however they want to structure them. And they can just roll it all together and they can start making offers that honestly don't really make sense individually, but make sense as a package. So because you brought in your container load to Walmart and because you're storing it in Walmart and we're charging you storage fees, yeah, we'll do like, $3 deliveries. Like, they'll choose where to discount it, but I think it's going to put a lot of pressure on the market for people that are just providing like one service. Now that you have these mega corporations that are getting into all kinds of things.
Well, I mean, it's a smart play because they are involved and they probably have steeper discounts and they can act like an MVOCC, and are able to provide a better service because they have a lot of their own product. So for them to mix it in and they already have the analytics and the data for it, I think it's a very, very smart play on their behalf. And I'm curious to see who would take and follow Walmart's example and start doing it. Do you see someone like Best Buy doing something similar? Because they have an interesting marketplace, but they're not doing anything in the logistics space yet, and they could. And with a lot of their tech help startups and tech development in-house stuff, how do you translate those services on the other end of the spectrum? You have a delivery, and then you have a guy that shows up and puts everything up together for you at the same time as your gig worker delivers that product to your house. It's not always the back end of the supply chain, but also the front end. It would be kind of interesting what they do in different retrospects.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it takes a ton of money. I saw something the other day, and I know when the last time I wrote about something with Walmart's quarterly earnings or something like that, and compared it to Target, it was absurd. But like, I mean, Walmart, and I'm sure this was their quarterly earnings, was pulling in like 500. I want to say maybe it was profitability. Let's just say it was like 5 times. Because I don't remember the actual base number and I don't want to mess it up, but it was 5 times, like, let's call it the revenue between them and someone like Target. And then, so to your point though, you take Best Buy, which would fall well below probably even a Target, just because of the breadth of merchandise or the specific focus. It's like, I just don't think they could even afford it. And like, they definitely couldn't afford it to the point of being as competitive as someone like a Walmart or Amazon. And that's the challenge. Oh, the one I wrote about was in the newsletter, was Coupang out of Korea, who's like into food delivery, video streaming, gaming, on top of being like the Amazon of South Korea. So it's like these flywheels of things that are just crushing it. And I don't think many people have the capability of even competing. And I kind of think that the Walmarts and the Amazons and stuff, every time someone just tries to copy what they do, they're like laughing. It like plays into their strategy, because they know how expensive it is, and they know that they're essentially weakening competition just by them trying to replicate what they're offering.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's that time, John. We like to keep focused and not go over our 8 o'clock
This is
deadline, and
true.
we can probably go on for hours talking about waking up and delivering. Do you want to have let's put some final thoughts in and call it a day today?
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything specific final thoughts. I hope everyone has a good week, and obviously going to keep watching what's going in. August is winding down, so back to school starting, Thanksgiving, and then into the holidays. So big stuff coming for Q4, and I think we have something we're going to be talking about that in the next number of weeks anyway with Jess. So that'll probably be where we'll save some of that for.
It's crazy to think that Q3 is ending here shortly, and we're into Q4. And
Yeah.
we talked about it before. Get ready to get prepped for it. It's going to be an interesting Q4, but it's around the corner now. So, like you said, everybody have a great week. We'll see you next Monday, and thanks for joining.
Thanks. Bye.